Good, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen Aid, where we're at the week's current affairs with the best political team on television from a very Auckland perspective. Although this week, every New Zealander is a Cantabrian. Joining me tonight, I'm a revolving panel of bloggers and Auckland opinion shapers. She's a lecturer at the Department of Film, Television and Media Studies at the University of Auckland, digital feminist and blogger Phoebe Fletcher. And he is the Darth Vader of the internet, minus the moment of redemption at the end, meaning you're just pure evil. Right-wing Storm blogger Cameron Slater. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, issue 1. It's the story that dominated the week. The Christchurch earthquake is New Zealand's worst natural disaster, with dozens officially dead, hundreds missing, hundreds injured, and costs of up to $16 billion. Beyond the shock and condolences, how does Christchurch come back from this? How does New Zealand come back from this? And what did panellists think of the media coverage? Issue 2. On any other week, the Welfare Working Group's recommendation to radically change the welfare state would have dominated news. But hours after its announcement, Christchurch was devastated. What are the impacts of the largest redesign of the New Zealand welfare state since its formation in 1938? Issue 3 tonight. Again, on any other week, it would have been the top political story. Hone Harawira and the Māori Party have cut a deal allowing Hone to be an independent or start a new party, free without challenge to his electorate, and he won't run anyone in their electorates. What are the ramifications to this deal? And we'll end the show on a final word. But let's kick things off with issue 1. The shock and suddenness of the utter devastation of Christchurch eclipsed any other issue this week. We all have whānau there, and the desperate scrambling in that first day trying to contact friends and family made this disaster something we all connected with. As the dust settles, we ask what now? First to both of you, any friends and family being able to contact everyone?
Most of the people, yes.
Yep, you're all good?
My ex-brother-in-law's still missing in action, but my sister's not too worried about that.
Condolences. Phoebe, let's focus on the role of social media in the coverage. How does Twitter and Facebook expand the direct experience of an event like this?
I think it expands the direct experience of an event like this immensely, in that it functioned as an important way that information could be circulated immediately. We also had, messages from the government encouraging to use these platforms. So, for example, things like posting on someone's Facebook page when they've been found, posting where goods and money and so on can be dropped off. I think it really increased the immediacy of the event. And certainly what we're hearing from Christchurch is that this was very useful for people that were down there and able to access the internet.
Yeah. Now you've got the people who have gone out of their way to build little applications to help people too. So you've got the person finder application. Just last night I was contacted by Ryan Sproul to publicise another Google application for people who have got spare accommodation, not just in the Christchurch area but around the country, to say, hey, let's get some people who haven't got houses anymore to take them into their home, and it's spreading that around. I mean, I put that up on my blog. I was asked to, I helped out. It was a phenomenal amount of hits and traffic came in on that from people accessing that straight off Twitter. So I think that Twitter and Facebook, blogs, providing perhaps a little bit more of the detail that you're not going to get off the major news sites who are covering the news aspect of it rather than the helping aspect of it.
Right. So in terms of actual information, as a blogger, you think it's complementary?
I absolutely. It's always complementary. It's a different slant on things, a different approach to assisting. The news media are telling the news. Bloggers are saying, here's the news, but also, please, would you have a look at this? Right. And when you've got sites like mine and David Farrer and some of the other, more well-known sites that are able to, that have got huge numbers of people reading them every day. In some cases, more than newspapers. And if you look at Christchurch, well, their newspaper's out of action. CTV is flattened. So the other areas of the media, including blogs, need to step up, and I think they are.
From what I've heard from people I know in Christchurch too, a lot of the information that they're getting is off national radio and the internet rather than television at the moment.
Talking of television, what did you both think of the coverage to date, TV1 and TV3?
Well, I thought that TV3 did a superb job. In actual fact, they acted as the public broadcaster, and I thought that they got around. But the person that I think did the most amazing job is the stuff reporter out of the press. You know, her building's fallen down around her ears, and she gets out there with the cameraman and is walking around the streets trying to document what's happening. You could hear the emotion in her voice, but she just carried on doing her job, and I thought that was superb. It's some of the best footage from literally right after the earthquake.
I'd agree with Cameron there. I do think at some points some of the news coverage has been a little bit intrusive for people who have just been through a very traumatic event.
That's always going to be the case, though.
Well, TVNZ had one yesterday that said, talking to a guy, and says, "Have you spoken to your wife?" And the guy said, "Yes, I have." And then the reporter said, "Is she still alive?" You know, just silly, cheesy stuff like that. But I think on the whole, I think TV3 has done a better job than TVNZ. That said, TVNZ's now catching up. You know, but getting press releases from Andy Brotherston telling us when we can see the coverage, well, we just need to turn the TV on. We don't need a press release to tell us that.
National Radio have been pretty good, haven't they?
I think they have. And again, as I said, you know, their radio, of course, becomes very, very important during a disaster like this when you get infrastructure that is wiped out.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to remember that still 80% of Christchurch doesn't have access to water.
Yeah.
So radio and power.
So a radio with batteries works.
Yeah.
A TV that needs to be plugged in doesn't work.
I actually think John Campbell his coverage has been really quite amazing. I think that he has been able to articulate and put into words the feelings in a way that just reminds you, oh, that's right, you're actually a bloody good journalist when you're allowed to be. Let's be blunt. A question to both of you. How does our second largest city come back from this? I mean, surely the psychological impact alone mean that the rest of New Zealand should expect a mass exodus as Cantabrians choose to leave the city for good.
Well, I don't agree with that. I think Cantabrians have always had this legend that they're hard men, that they're tough and they can deal with it.
But surely the aftershock after aftershock after aftershock is enough for you to think maybe it's time to leave.
Yes and no. The thing is it's your home.
Yep.
And so people didn't mass exodus San Francisco when that was levelled in was it 1901 or whatever it was. Sure, they had to live in tents and things for a long time. But and it would have been even longer back then.
I think we're a much more mobile population though now than 1901.
But if your life, your family, and everything's based around there, well, then you'll just make do and carry on. But I think there does need to be a come to Jesus meeting with the people of Christchurch and saying, okay, these buildings have got to go, right? We've got to run a bulldozer through all of these places here, this, and this, and we need to start again. There isn't going to be saving some of these buildings, honestly. I mean, they're holding each other up, and if you take one of them out, the rest of them are all going to come down.
You think there will be an exodus? You think that New Zealand's got to prepare for that?
I think that there are going to be some people that do want to leave that region. I mean, we're looking at, an aftershock every hour at the moment. These are people that went through a major earthquake just 5 months ago. This is an incredibly traumatising event. I wouldn't be surprised if there were a lot of people that did want to move, but I do agree with Cameron in that there will be some people that say, no, this is my home, this is where I base my family, this is where my emotional connection is to, that do not want to leave.
Yeah. But the central city itself is going to need, half of it's going to need to be demolished.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you had David Henderson, the Christchurch David Henderson, saying basically that the place is fucked. And
he owns most of those. he owns most of those buildings.
And he'll still own the land that's underneath them when they're bold. But it's a matter of putting them back. But clearly, we need to revisit a whole lot of our building codes.
Yep.
We need to. The Pine Gould building theoretically shouldn't have come down. The Grand Chancellor Hotel theoretically shouldn't be leaning over on other buildings.
That's right. The impact of this destruction on the wider New Zealand economy and infrastructure is akin to a national heart attack. We were in a double dip recession at the end of last year. This earthquake ends any hopes that economic recovery will occur this year. What do you think the wider impacts for New Zealand are?
I think it's going to be huge, obviously. I mean, it's a massive task in rebuilding. Beyond that, we've got to look at, a huge proportion of people down there that are not going to be able to work. I think it's going to take a while for the New Zealand economy to recover from this one.
There are political ramifications.
There's political ramifications. It's ironic. Actually, on Tuesday, the government was about to release its recovery plan for Canterbury. The Labour Party has been building up via their blogs and via MPs that the government was a do-nothing government, that it hadn't done anything to help the people of Christchurch. There was about to be released a recovery plan. Well, that all got ripped up on Tuesday, and now it's simply a reconstruction plan. It's ironic, though, Bomber, there's going to require a large input of government money into the region, and also a large amount of government spending. Kind of fits in with your Keynesian policies there. In actual fact, it might help us drag out of the recession a bit, in that some of the old infrastructure just gets taken out. We get new stuff getting built. There's going to be a lot of jobs for scaffolders. There's going to be a lot of jobs for construction firms. There's going to be a lot of jobs for labourers, that sort of thing. So in actual fact, and we found this after Edgecombe too, when we had the Edgecombe earthquake, there was a little mini boom in that area. Lots of jobs for 5 years out. So in actual fact, it probably helped the South Island.
And I think one element that we're slightly lucky on is the fact that we had almost a dry run 5 months ago where no one died. So, you know, the government and so on has had an opportunity to think about ways that you might deal with this kind of disaster.
Politically, though, there are ramifications. I got a feeling from the build-up that was happening from the Labour Party that they were going to use the response from the last earthquake to give the government a bit of a bash. Well, that's all out the window now.
What do you think? What's next for Christchurch?
Well, there's nothing you can do with earthquakes. You know, contrary to the God botherers that are out there that are running around,
been disgusting.
Blaming it on lesbians and homosexuals and everything else, which is just disgusting behaviour. And myself as a Christian finds that absolutely appalling. Apart from those people, there is actually nothing you can do about an earthquake. There's nothing. You know, the other thing is that we haven't yet had it blamed on either Mark Hodgson or on global warming, but it can't be too far away. You know, but what can they do? Well, they just have to suck it up, and it sounds really callous, but that's all you can do in a situation like this. And
what next for Christchurch?
I think it's going to be a long process of rebuilding, looking for people. I mean, we still haven't found everybody that's in the rubble. I mean, this is going to be an event that goes on for quite some time.
There's no point in asking who wins and loses in this event. We've all lost, and the strength and courage of those international and domestic who have rushed in to help reminds us of the small wins. Thank you, panel. Issue 2, forget the mother of all budgets. The original Ruth Richardson benchmark for slashing welfare. National have produced the father of all budgets, and by the looks of it, Dad is an angry, violent drunk with a penchant for grievous bodily harm. Phoebe, the ideologically stacked welfare raiser gang have given the government the report they wanted, and it's the crippling of the welfare state. Is it the one thing we ask of solo parents, that they look after the child? How does forcing them to look for work after the child, before the child is school age, in the best interest of the child, the parent, and the wider community?
Well, it's not. I think there's a number of things that really didn't. I was sitting down reading the reports last night, and one thing that struck me was there was a lot of talk about the rise in beneficiaries since the 1970s. And okay, they've got this figure of 170,000 people that have been on a benefit for more than 5 years out of the last 10 years. And I sort of was sitting there thinking, something has changed. What might that be? Well, it's the contraception pill. And that we do, obviously, since the 1970s, we have had a rise in solo mothers. This is something that a lot of societies are beginning to have to deal with at the moment. Clearly, men might consider taking some more responsibility in that equation. But what I found quite interesting is, in terms of the countries around the Netherlands and so on that they cited, those are all countries that have a much higher GDP per capita than us. They are all countries that in some ways have much more social support for women. So I would kind of agree with John Armstrong in that we've got a potential $1.3 billion that could be saved. We might be looking at as much as $1.5 billion in spending in order to save that money. So I think in some ways it is very disadvantaging for women not to be able to enter into the workforce. I don't think this is necessarily their fault. I think if you look at research that has come out of the 2002 Health Research Council, they have found that there are immense barriers to women in terms of being able to find flexible work that suits their childcare obligations. So I think, in terms of pushing through this legislation, there needs to be some very serious thought about what are the supporting mechanisms? And I note that it's in the same week that Simon Power has, released a speech on the cost of crime.
Well, he wouldn't have written that anyway.
Cam,
Yeah.
all stick and no carrot makes little Johnny a prison statistic. Where are the jobs for solo parents, the handicapped, the mentally unwell, and the sick? Where are the jobs?
Well, they're in Christchurch right now.
Well, if they can build.
There's a lot of things about the welfare working group that I don't like about it. There's a lot of things that are actually refreshing in that we've had someone who can put at least another option on the table. The facts are, and Chris Trotter alluded to that on this show just before Christmas, that welfare as we know it hasn't worked because we've still got all of these people that are in need, and the idea of welfare is that it's a helping hand to get you out of being in need, and in actual fact that hasn't happened. And if you use just a single case, for example, particularly around sole parents, if you look at the case that the Labour Party is using to beat up John Key over, the woman who had the girl that he took up to. Now, when John Key first met that woman, she had 3 children, including Araha, and 3 years later, she's now got 6 children, and John Key's the evil bastard who's put her in that position. And so you've got situations like that are probably the extremes, but you've still got situations like that occurring. And
using those extremes to
what the
welfare
working group doing is starting to align differing parts of government policy. For example, we've got the 20 hours of ECE funding that's available, and the working group aligns the 20 hours with, well, we need you to be thinking about working part-time for 20 hours.
Where are those jobs going to come from?
Well, in a recession right now, and looking at it in a microcosm as you'll want to do, then you can say, well, that's never going to happen. But what we need is long-term forward planning. And we simply haven't had that. We've got, well, these people need money, chuck some money at them. These people need some money, chuck some money at them. But that doesn't work. If it worked, if throwing money at the problem worked, we wouldn't have a problem now.
Sometimes, you know as well as I do, look, there were just some people, through their mental illness, through their handicap, through the dependency on alcohol or drugs, mate, you know as well as I do, they're never going to get a job, are they?
No, exactly. And my brother-in-law is a classic case of that. He's intellectually disabled. He's never going to have a job. And the government took away the only job that he did have.
And they made a mistake.
And they made a mistake. But Labour is still going down the path of insisting on that. But welfare, and I expand that all the way through from to include working for families and also superannuitants and pensioners. We've got this massive bloated welfare state where there's people who simply don't need welfare. Right? We've got middle class welfare and it's extended into that, and I think the working group missed out actually looking at that. Working for families is a trap and it's catching people out, and that's where they really should be going up.
Phoebe, the costs for childcare are not included in this, and estimates are there'll be $1.5 billion. There's no way National are going to find that money even before the Christchurch earthquake. The reality is that despite all the soothing words from John Key, the policy will pass minus the childcare, and solo parents will be forced to find the work regardless or have their benefit cut, won't they?
This is one thing that worries me. I mean, I think if you look at the countries in the Netherlands and so on that they were using as a comparison, they have, strong social systems. If you look at somewhere like the United States, they have 70% of their solo mothers working, but a lot of them are in poverty. I think the rate for child poverty is around sort of 45%. So, there are ramifications towards putting that policy through without, necessarily having the social movements that buttress it. And I think one thing that the government will do well to deal with is actually the stigmatisation of solo mothers in terms of being able to find them jobs. I mean, it's a very difficult life to lead, and I don't think, despite kind of the popular mythology that women choose to do this, I would say there'd be a very small percentage of people that would do that, but it's a hard life.
That's right. Cam, with New Zealand First poised to release their policy aimed at National Party rump vote, John Key needed to throw his electorate some raw meat Benny bashing policy to keep them immune to Winston's charm. Has he bashed Benny's enough for national voters? Now, I appreciate it's a difficult question because you can never bash Benny's enough for national voters. Has he done enough?
I actually don't agree with your
Of course you don't.
scenario that there's Benny bashing. But I don't think we're bashing the right people. Right? I actually reckon that we should be looking at some of the deadbeat dads that are out there.
Yep.
There's plenty out there that are basically spraying their seed to any receptacle that'll take it, and breeding vast quantities of children and walking away and abrogating their responsibilities from that. And when you've got no other option, then you turn to the state. And so we've got a lot of women that are forced into that. Yes, through their poor choices, and they're not even partners in a lot of instances. It's just a temporary, bed warmer in some instances. But I know guys that have got 9-10 children to 5 different women.
That's ridiculous.
Outrageous.
Yeah.
It's not outrageous, but I can introduce you to 5 of them in 10 minutes.
And I'm sure you'll be impregnated. Look, question to both of you. With the destruction of Christchurch, will there be any time to actually have the wider ramifications of this welfare reform debated? Will it happen?
No, it won't.
It won't.
No.
Cam, who wins, who loses in this crippling of the welfare state?
Well, I think that nobody wins and loses because I don't think that they've approached this enough outside of the box. Everyone acknowledges that welfare is an issue. Even you guys acknowledge that welfare is an issue. Has the welfare working group supplied any solutions? Yes, around the periphery, but we really do have a problem in New Zealand, and it's our addiction to welfare from the very, very poor all the way to the incredibly wealthy. I mean, you've got working for families is middle class and upper class welfare.
Who wins, who loses?
Well, I think who loses is definitely the groups that are already poor. I mean, if you look at the groups that are going to be most affected by this legislation, it is Māori and Pacific and youth as well. I mean, we have very high rates of youth unemployment in New Zealand at the moment, and that is to do with the fact that we're coming out of a global recession.
Wage rate really helps
So that is going to feed into this as well, and these are elements that need to be considered.
Thank you, panel. Coming up, Hone Harawira and the Māori Party sing Fleetwood Mac's Go Your Own Way and cut the political deal of the election. What are its ramifications? Citizen A is back after the break. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Citizen A. We're reviewing the week with bloggers Phoebe Fletcher and perpetual right-wing candidate Cameron Slater. Issue 3 this week, Hone's team has managed to negotiate an incredible non-aggression pact with the Māori Party for his peaceful exit. The Māori Party won't stand anyone against him in his Northern electorate seat, allowing him to stand as an independent or as a member of a new political party, and he won't stand any member of a new political party against them in any Māori electorate. What are the ramifications of this, Phoebe? The Māori Party had no choice but to negotiate a non-aggression pact as generous as this, did they?
I don't think that they did have a choice, no. I think Hone is too popular in his electorate and too popular with Māori around the country.
And the Maori Party had a completely inept and stupid constitution that you could drive a truck through.
Cam, you posted a greasy and slimy blog supporting Chris Trotter's critique on me and did a fine jig in claiming a new left party would never launch. Hone cut a pretty good deal here, didn't they?
I haven't seen the new left-wing party yet, though, Bomber. I mean, you might say that Hone's going to have is going to create a party around him. It takes more than just winning a seat to have a party mechanism, a party organisation, and all the things that Chris Trotter said about having a constitution, having your 500 members, having the people on the ground who know what they're doing. All of those things need to happen to have an actual party.
Hone cut a pretty good deal, didn't they?
Well, it's a completely venal and frankly typical deal that they've cut here amongst politicians, where he gets to keep his nose in the trough as being an MP. The Maori Party gets to have the trouble go away, and they get to keep their noses in an even bigger trough. Yeah, it's a pretty good deal for all concerned.
Phoebe, how does the Māori Party restore credibility with their electorate?
Oh, I mean, this is a tough one because we saw Ratana go towards Labour. So I think that Hone splitting actually, does have broader ramifications. Tai Tokerau, of course, is a very important electorate for Māori. I think they've basically said the way that they're going to go, which is to, go and make concessions in terms of who's in power. I don't think this is necessarily a bad move by the Māori Party. I think if you look back through kind of the history of legislation around Māori, what you find is that unemployment for Māori tends to drop when Labour are in, but it's National that tend to cut the deals with Māori. So we see
National's
things like
been better for
Kura
Māori.
Kaupapa, the Wānanga, and
Well,
so
they
on
had
actually
Whānau
pushed
Ora.
through during those times. And Whānau Ora. So I think that this is going to kind of split the Māori vote. I can understand that there would be a large
Only in that
proportion of
electorate.
Māori that would want to
Only
vote
in
for
that
Hone.
electorate
Cam-
will split
Cam-
the Maori vote. Because if you look at Whānau Ora, that's the one thing that people haven't yet cottoned on to with the welfare working group. The
that's
welfare working group allows the contracting out of services and the money associated with the benefit and the beneficiaries
Yeah.
to organisations like Whānau Ora and iwi-based things. No one's raised that. Everyone's focused on the Benny bashing part, but they haven't looked on the wins for the Maori Party in the welfare working group.
Cam, a new party with Hone would need 46,611 votes to gain 3 MPs with his electorate seat. That's 1.99% of the vote. You claim that is impossible. Really?
Yeah, it is. It is impossible. Hone Harawira is not a team player. If you want
Sue
to,
Bradford is.
yeah, right. The only thing Sue Bradford wants to do in setting up a new left-wing party is to smack the crap out of the Greens in revenge for her not being selected as the co-leader.
Matt
That's
McCarthy's
it.
a good team player.
Not sure Matt's going to step up to the plate on that.
Phoebe, who wins? Well, we'll see. Who wins, who loses from his
We will.
political deal between Hone and the Māori Party?
I think both sides win. I think we're going to have to see what pans out. I mean, I agree with Cameron in that it might be quite difficult to get a party off the ground. It depends on how many people vote. We do have, I think it was the last census, 43% of the population earning less than $20,000. So it really depends on kind of what, I guess, what movements get put through by National. I think Christchurch has kind of taken the focus of welfare reform for a bit, so we'll have to wait and see.
Who wins, who loses from this political deal between Hone and the Māori Party?
Well, Hone gets to keep his seat for another 3 years, so he wins. The Maori Party wins in that they haven't got him sniping now from the outside, from within inside the party, and so all the headlines associated with the party splitting up and all those ructions, that disappears. Who loses? Probably the people in Hone's electorate, because he's going to be a sole voice in Parliament.
Oh, well, he might bring some extra MPs in with the new party.
Oh yes, you've got wood for that, haven't you?
Haven't I just? Let's wrap this show with last word. Phoebe, your last word this week is?
My last word would actually have to be on the protests that are going on across the Arab world at the moment. I think this is a fascinating moment. I've been writing a big piece that is still not finished yet for Scoop, which is basically looking at the way that, this is a moment where Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations theory really falls over. There is no such thing as a stable Islamic bloc. There is no such thing as Islam thinking in unison, rising up as a multi-headed monster to take over the world in the apocalypse. We are really seeing that there is a growth of a human rights movement there. I think we really need to take this opportunity as countries to be able to talk across. I mean, one of the really interesting things for me is the way that they've been using Western imagery in the posters. For example, the Guy Fawkes mask of V from V for Vendetta, or the way that the Libyans have used Obama's Hope poster and modified it to be Gaddafi with hopeless. I think this is a really interesting moment in terms of our conception of the state. The state is going to be much more porous from now on, and this is the effect of social networking. The most successful states are going to have to deal with this. So this is kind of a big change in terms of the way that technology is impacting. I mean, really the fact that we're seeing 13 cities across China, thinking about having protests, or a quarter of the protesters in Wisconsin carrying Egyptian flags. This is showing that this is a moment where, social networking is really beginning to break down those boundaries of the nation state as we traditionally think.
Cam, your final word this week is?
My final word is to the bigots out there that are trying to blame or say that the cause of the Christchurch earthquake is because of our depravity in our society and all of this sort of nonsense. As soon as I find out who they are and what their websites are, then I make a promise now to the viewers of Citizen A that I will out them just as much as I've outed the bigots and Rodney electorate.
Good. You do, yeah. See, you're not so evil. Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you, Cam. Ladies and gentlemen, my final word. In a tactic that National have used again and again and again, the ideologically stacked welfare razor gang gave the government the radical policy they needed and managed to add an element so fascist that it made Genghis Khan wince with their back to work after 14 weeks for a second child, which allowed John Key to reject it, creating the perception that he's moderated what is still a radical attack on society's most vulnerable and weak. National did it with the mining conservation land. They put up Great Barrier when they never had any intention of mining Great Barrier, so they could remove it from the list to make them look like they had listened and create the perception of moderation. While he is about to glide around in his new ass-massaging BMW, he had the audacity to describe the forcing of mothers back to work after 14 weeks as making him queasy, which is funny because his comments that poor people who take food parcels are to blame for their own poverty, alongside his claim that if he cut welfare to all beneficiaries, then bugger all would starve, made me feel pretty queasy as well. National's tactic of posing 100% crazy and then selling 80% crazy as compromise is like getting the National Front to write your immigration policy, look aghast at what they've come up with, and then implement most of it. While the political arguments battle, however, they pale when compared to the pain being suffered in Christchurch right now. Our thoughts are with our Southern whānau this week. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded news citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Citizen Bomber Facebook page. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night out here, though.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.